Oh, yeah. It's going to be a good day when we get started with Ron Swanson. That's good. Yeah, we want to talk a little bit about conflict today. Why not? It's Valentine's weekend, so we thought that's pretty good timing. So you're welcome. I'm sure that was no one in here is dealing with any conflicts, but maybe you have some friends who are. And technology makes it even easier now to pick fights with people and get in conflicts, get in feuds with people even than ever before. If you're on Twitter at all, part of what's weird about Twitter is actually it's become somewhat famous just for the feuds that happen all the time. All the, people get to fight now in public and everybody just gets to watch. There's all sorts of celebrities are always in feuds on Twitter. I don't follow Taylor Swift on there, but if you follow her, she's always feuding with different other celebrities, Katy Perry or Kim Kardashian or ex-boyfriend, always feuds going there. And a lot of them between athletes will get on there and start kind of picking on each other. I think Ryan and Danny are in the middle of a big Twitter feud right now, so you can watch that. No, and I didn't realize this, but actually a lot of the fast food restaurants and stuff actually kind of feud with each other on Twitter. It's pretty funny. I mean, you most likely heard last year was really one of the biggest conflicts that really happened in all of 2019, but luckily we survived. Was Chick-fil-A versus Popeyes chicken, right? That was just this huge and kind of blew up all over Twitter, and they're just kind of getting on each other's case. But then here's what's funny: they're the unexpected third party came in. It's all Chick-fil-A and Popeyes, and then Wendy's comes in from out of nowhere. And I didn't realize, man, the Wendy's people are actually really funny. They're really creative. And Chick-fil-A, they tweeted about just kind of a marketing one. They said, what's better than enjoying one of our original chicken sandwiches on a sunny Friday afternoon? And Wendy's tweeted and they replied, they said, enjoying one of our chicken sandwiches on a Sunday. Oh, got him right there, man. That's good. That's smart. So it's easy, man. It's so easy to get in conflicts all the time now. All of our relationships, easy to get in them with roommates, with friends, maybe in marriage, with parenting, with neighbors, all sorts of stuff. I got a buddy who lives in OB, he's in a big fight right now with his neighbor. Their hedge is growing too high, blocks his ocean view, so they kind of fight and just do all these little kind of things, getting back at each other. All sorts of great unhealthy stuff. But so conflict can really, just really kind of happen anywhere. And really for most of us, you kind of fall into one of two categories, I'm guessing. I won't make you raise your hand. You can decide for you. Some of us are kind of conflict seekers. You're like Ron Swanson. You like to stir the pot. You think it's fun to just kind of set things out and kind of watch what happens. I had a buddy from Australia, a good friend. I learned a ton from him, but he just thought it was so fun to watch Americans fight with each other and debate about things. So he'd come to a party at my house and then just ask some political question just to start a fire. I'm like, dude, you can't keep doing that. You think it's funny to watch Americans fight with each other, but we're all tired. And so maybe that's you. You like to stir the pot. You don't mind being around it. Then there's the other category, conflict avoiders. All right, you want to just avoid conflict at all costs. Conflict avoiders unite as long as we can get along, unite along. No, I can recognize you very well because that's what I am. My conflict avoidance gotten kind of to the extreme of I don't even like to be in the room when my wife's watching reality TV shows where there's lots of yelling and fighting because I can just feel my blood pressure going up. There's conflict. It's not even in this room, but I can just see it and hear it. So maybe you're more on kind of the conflict avoiding side. You just don't want to be around it, and you try to just sweep things under the rug or just go silent treatment. I've done that a few times. If I get really quiet with you, that's when you should be afraid, because then I'm probably mad. No, right? Or maybe you go the passive aggressive route and you'd rather do that versus other people that would rather just fight it out. My wife and I are total opposites, which doesn't make marriage quite as easy, but it makes it interesting because she'd rather, hey, let's just deal with it now and fight it out, which is way healthier, and then I would rather just kind of avoid it and try to sweep it under the rug. So wherever you fall on that, though, we're all called to actually be conflict reconcilers. I mean, that's what it looks like to be like Jesus, people who actually not always resolve conflict because it doesn't always get resolved, but at least work toward reconciling. We'll talk about the difference. So wherever you're at on that, I want to challenge you. God's challenged me. I've come a long ways. If I would go unchecked in my life as conflict avoider, I would do do just even more really unhealthy things. But God's really worked on me in it. And so wherever you are on the spectrum, I want to talk to you, and I promise to get super, super practical. Even if you're already thinking of people like, don't go tell me to forgive this person because I got a lot of good reasons why I don't. I promise we'll get super practical and address that. I actually want to show you an actual real conflict from the Bible, actual Bible story where people are just fighting, just so you know. Because sometimes, we picture the Bible, it can get very kind of Sunday school stories. I mean, we just kind of picture the early church leaders. They're all like these super Christians. I'm sure they just always got along all the time, just kind of got together and, sang worship songs. Everybody always got along. Listen, these are real human beings. They have totally different personality types, just like all of us. They have different opinions about things, different attitudes, different backgrounds. And so conflicts come up. And I love that God was actually intentional to put some of those in the Bible so we can see them, learn from them. One we're looking at today, we've been kind of walking through some of the book of Acts this year, and we talked about how it's really the start of the early church, like back when the church first birthed, right after Jesus died, rose again, went up to heaven, leaves all the Christ followers to carry on the mission. And Apostle Paul, he's one of these earliest followers. We haven't gotten to his great conversion story yet. You'll love it when we get there in a few weeks. But he's a guy who went from very anti-Jesus. He's definitely a conflict seeker and really just loved going after people who actually believed in Jesus, and he just thought they were so wrong, and so got really violent towards them. And he ends up becoming a guy that's totally just pro-Jesus. Plants church, disciples, baptizes people, and ends up writing all sorts of stuff that becomes part of our Bible, part of the New Testament of our Bible. So Paul, great guy, productive guy for the mission of God. Doesn't do it alone. He's got his right-hand guy, Barnabas. Barnabas is the son of encouragement. That's what his name means. So he's a great encourager. In fact, when people first doubted Paul, because you know how you get skeptical when all of a sudden you hear in the media that somebody, became a Christian, and you're like, yeah, I'm sure, right? I haven't seen that yet in their life, and we can tend to get really skeptical. That's what people thought with Paul. Like, there's no way. Like, I've seen what this guy's done. And Barnabas was the first to speak up for him. So he's this great encourager. So these guys are awesome tag team partners in ministry, and they fight. And they have conflicts. There's actually two major conflicts between these two that are recorded in the book of Acts. We'll just look at just one of them today. But so here's in Acts 15. Here's how it goes. So sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, this is later after they went on a long journey planning a bunch of churches. And Paul says to Barnabas, let's go back and visit all the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord so we can see how they're doing. He wants to check in, and he can't call them or email them or text them, right? You have to actually travel all the way back in person and do it. Barnabas, he wanted to go. He wanted to take John, also called Mark, one of the other disciples. He wanted to take John Mark with them. But Paul did not think it was wise to take him because John Mark deserted them in Pamphylia, and he had not continued with them in the work. So you can already see there's a conflict. Barnabas hey, I know this guy deserted us, but let's give him a second chance, right? He's a good, faithful guy. Let's invest in him. Paul's like, no way, dude. We got work to get done for the mission of God. I don't have time to waste on people that aren't all in. I want people that are all in. So you can see they disagree. In fact, verse 39, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose someone else, a young guy named Silas. He left, went his own way, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. And so these guys totally disagree, and they just part ways. And one of the things I find most fascinating about this story, we mentioned that Luke, he's one of the apostles. He wrote the Gospel of Luke. He wrote the book of Acts. And so Luke writes his book, and surely there's hundreds and hundreds of stories going on. He chose to record a few of them, so we get a picture of what the early church is like. Why would Luke then bother to include some of the fights that these guys had? I mean, really, if you're a good PR guy, marketing guy, you want to give this picture of, hey, the early church was amazing. We were always unified. We were always together. We always got along. I mean, that's crazy and cool, I think, fascinating that Luke's like, no, you know what? I want to give the real picture. I want you guys to know it wasn't that easy. We actually did fight. And so he includes this as well as some other big disagreements because, hey, it's still hard to lead a church. It's hard to start churches. And so back then he's like, yeah, all sorts of conflicts happening. And he records quite a few of them. Part of what I believe God's communicating through that is that we don't just need to see conflict as something to avoid or as something that we just got to work quickly through. Or even sometimes we can think, well, it's not really Christian to have conflicts. If you're really Christian, then just everybody should get along all the time. And I believe God's challenging that, saying, no, listen, conflict can actually be a healthy thing. It can actually be an opportunity to grow. It can actually help us see each other's perspectives. The rest of our world already knows how healthy conflict can be, kind of in the business world. A lot of great books about how when you have healthy conflict, it actually brings a lot of great things to surface. Someone just sent me a podcast this week, and they say, here, listen to this. It talks about so many people get anxious about having unhealthy conflict at work. And this business leader is saying you should actually be more concerned about having unhealthy peace at work. And that's interesting. Unhealthy peace. You know that, where it looks like peace, but it's fake unity, it's fake harmony, because underneath the surface, everybody's just secretly mad at everybody else, and there's grudges and passive aggressive and all sorts of stuff going on. And it talks about the idea of, we should actually mine for conflict. Let's bring it out. Let's have healthy conflict. Same is true for marriage as well. This couple, Gary and Aaron Smalley, these marriage experts, they wrote this book, great book title. It's called Fight Your Way to a Better Marriage. And so we're like, that sounds like the book for me. Fight Your Way to Better Marriage, how healthy conflict can take you to deeper levels of intimacy. All right, so again, this idea that healthy conflict can actually help things get stronger. So business world knows it, relationship world, psychology world. Of course, God's known it all along. Long before any of this, all the way back in Book of Wisdom, Book of Proverbs, he said it like this, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Iron sharpening iron. I know you probably don't do a lot of sharpening of swords and stuff in your life, since we don't do that a lot, but certainly you've seen it, on movies, or even as you sharpen knives and stuff. And what happens? When iron sharpens iron, sparks fly, right? But both things end up sharper. And that happens in our relationships. Sparks fly. But when we're doing it healthy, both things end up sharper and healthier. That's part of why Steve was encouraging for men. How do we get together and connect, actually make each other better? Same is true for women with women and in our marriages and all that stuff as well. So God's always said that. He's like, yeah, it's going to feel like iron sharpening iron. And we see lots of stories of that throughout the Bible. But it's sharpening each other. So I just wanted to start there. You don't have to be afraid of conflict. We're not here to say, good Christians never have conflicts. Not true. It's just learning how to do it in a healthy way. So how do we do that? It starts with this. I'm sure you've heard this before, but we got to start there. Is learning to understand the other person's perspective. Right? It always starts with listening, with understanding. You can see how different people that have totally different personality types, totally different backgrounds and childhoods and experiences, they approach the exact same situation totally differently. In this story, Barnabas, again, he's literally known as the encourager. That's what his name means. I love that about him. He's an encouraging guy. He's always speaking up for people. Like I said, he's the only one who defended Paul when everybody else doubted him. And look what he's doing again, defending somebody else. John Mark already blew it. He's a waste of time. Don't waste your time investing. No. I think he's worth a second chance. Let's bring him with us. Right, so you can see Barnabas. You got Paul's side. Paul's a fiery dude. There's a reason he got a lot of stuff done. He fought through a lot of stuff. He'd been in prison and beaten, and he's one of those guys, literally, story says he just got back up and walked right back into the city. And so he's one of these guys just like unstoppable. We're going to carry out the mission of God, and don't have time to slow it down with people that aren't all in on this. So you can see how there's conflict, right? And, some people, maybe you look at it and you feel like, yeah, Barnabas is too soft. It's too soft. People need to learn, and they only learn with consequences, with discipline. Some of you look at Paul just going, Paul's too harsh. People deserve second chance. They deserve grace. So who's right? What if they're both right? What if they're both right? I think they both have really godly perspectives. They're just different. Right? And so maybe we should start a little church fight and see who's Team Paul and who's Team Barnabas, and then we'll kind of see where everybody lands. Yeah, let's not start a fight. But no, but you can see, right, how different people can have, totally different perspectives. So, what can we do to better understand where somebody else is coming from? They don't have the same background as you. They don't have the same experience as you, and maybe not wired up the same as you. And that's not an excuse for people to do bad things, but it helps our perspective with people. One of the things that actually has been most helpful thing really in my marriage for me and Jen, because we're wired super different, was understanding that. So even though we have read a few marriage books and we like to do marriage life groups and stuff, one of the most helpful things for us has been taking like personality assessments. I love to do like the DISC and the Enneagram and Strengths Finder and all those, because I'm like, any insight I can get into people and where they're coming from, then that really helps. And so we really started to realize, how she's wired on like the DISC assessment versus me and all this kind of stuff. And so that's just been super helpful. It's not an excuse. I don't get to say, well, yeah, sorry, I'm a jerk. That's just how I'm wired up. So it doesn't let you do that. But it helps us understand, okay, this is going to be my default when I'm not careful. This is going to be the things that come easier for me, and these are things I'm going to have to stretch myself more to be able to do. And so that's helped us a ton, because we're wired very different in terms of introvert, extrovert, even in terms of conflict. She's more conflict, let's just hash it out right now and deal with it. And I'd be more conflict avoider, which would be super unhelpful for our marriage if we went that route. And so it's been so helpful. So that's one of the ways. Maybe for you, we actually have had our kids now that they're teenagers and older. We've had them just kind of, do some of the kind of personality assessments and stuff, because, you'll find if you become a parent that you really have to parent each kid differently, because they're all wired so different. And so now we know, like, no, the way we discipline with the first kid is so different than with the third and all that kind of stuff. So, but all of that is just about how do we understand where people are coming from. The other is, how do we understand the conflict better? I mean, what's at the heart of why we're really fighting? I know we think the heart of why we're really fighting is because the other person's just wrong and they're being an idiot. If they could just see it my way, we wouldn't have to fight and have this conflict. But it's really about digging deeper, right, into why are we really fighting? Why are we in this conflict? Is it because I'm someone that just needs to win every argument? I just have to always get the last word in? Is it because, I'm someone that, I just care mostly about my ego, I don't like to lose, or about my appearance, reputation, what people will think, or I just like to take little things and sort of blow them out of proportion? I mean, why? Maybe I care more about being right than reconciling. Jesus' own brother, James, in his letter in the New Testament, James chapter 4, he says some pretty hard words. I think they're pretty right on. You can decide what you think, but he says, there's a reason you have conflicts and quarrels among you. He says, here's why. So he says, actually, all our fights and quarrels boil down to one thing. You're not getting what you want. That's pretty profound. It's not easy to hear. He says, because you're not getting what you want. And then he says, by the way, you don't have what you want because you're not asking God. So he pushes even further. It's interesting to think about, right? So what's really at the heart of this? And I think about, for Paul and Barnabas, they had such a sharp disagreement. They totally parted ways. And listen, this wasn't over like some doctrine thing. This wasn't about theology. They weren't debating, I believe Jesus really is the Son of God. No, he wasn't. Or, I believe that, he really rose from the dead. No, he really didn't. This wasn't like doctrinal stuff. This was just opinions about how to do ministry. Do we take people along and keep giving them a second and third chance and investing, trying to help them? Or do we just kind of let somebody else do it that and we move on with people we know we can count on? Really, it's just two different ways to approach ministry. And honestly, they can both be godly. And so, was this really one worth, parting company over? And so we need to figure that out with some of the conflicts in our lives. Some of them are real issues, no doubt, not denying that. We just got to get to the heart of what it is. Maybe these questions will be helpful for you. How serious is it? The other one is, does it need to be fixed right now? Does it need immediate resolution? Is this something that, that you can live with for whatever reason, not because we're putting it off and avoiding the conflict, but just because this timing is just not the right timing for this? Does it really have to be fixed right away? Some do, but not all. All right? Can we really respect each other's perspective? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say for Paul and Barnabas when they parted company. I don't know if it was a peaceful, you know what, let's just agree to disagree. And let's just each pick somebody and we'll go. Or if they left with some kind of, unspoken. I mean, I think they're godly men, so I think they left in kind of a healthier way. But, what is that? And again, am I more concerned with kind of being right than being reconciled? So just kind of challenging us to really kind of dig to, what's at the heart of this conflict? Is it something that, God's calling me to deal with in this moment? And it's about more than just my ego or needing to win, but it really is about trying to make things right. Is that what it is? And if it is a conflict worth dealing with, worth reconciling, then that's where we got to learn to do that. And we'll get really practical here because, I wonder if one of the things that grieves God the most is when conflict, not that conflicts happen. He knows they're going to happen. He knows we're people, imperfect people and messy people. And like we said, having conflict isn't unchristian, but it's when the conflicts just aren't resolved. And you think about when, and you may know people like this or part of your story, people, it's like, we used to be close friends. I haven't talked to them in years. You hear even siblings haven't talked to each other in 5, 10, 20 years. Parents and their adult children don't stay in touch, business partners, roommates, all sorts of things where people were close and then these conflicts come. And honestly, it can do a lot of damage. Both sides end up missing out on relationship. They miss out on life. It can end up affecting other people. I think like in the church world, I don't know if you've heard this, but one of the most hurtful things that I hear, and I hear it from non-Christians, and it hurts because they're right. And because I don't have a good answer, is, well, if churches can't even seem to get along, if Christians can't even seem to agree, then why would I want any part of that? Yeah, I don't know. Why would you? God calls us to be reconcilers, peacemakers. Jesus says in his famous Sermon on the Mount in the Beatitudes, he says, blessed are the peacemakers. And that challenges me. And that says, I don't get to just sit and be conflict avoider. I need to help make peace. Not even just peace keep. Some of us are good at keeping peace. Or I can at least keep the peace. No, it's the next step. Are you a peacemaker? Do we seek to resolve, to reconcile, to make peace? So Paul and Barnabas, this story, there's nothing more in Acts in terms of if they ever, what did they end up doing with John Mark? Did they ever agree? But here's what's cool. So Apostle Paul, so this story in Acts, it's not a great story to learn how to deal with conflict. I just wanted to show you the picture that these are real people and this really happened. But we learn how to handle conflict because Paul, having gone through this, ended up writing some powerful stuff. Really helpful, I think really practical for you today of how to deal with it. But check out, before you say, well, why should I listen to Paul? Because he obviously, couldn't even resolve this conflict. Check out at the end of 2 Timothy, we were in this book last week. It's the very last letter that we have from Paul. This is the last chapter, one of the last verses of his last letter. And Paul says this. He has Luke with him, who wrote the book of Acts. And I love how he calls this out. He says, only Luke is with me. Get John Mark, and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in my ministry. Paul has had a change of heart. He must have had some kind of reconciling with John Mark. He says, Luke, hey, bring him. Can you bring him with me? He says to Timothy. And he actually mentioned John Mark in 2 of his other letters, Philemon and Colossians. And so it's cool to see that Paul, I don't know how long the conflict went on, but at some point he made peace with that and he invited him back. And God can do something powerful when we make room for him to work in these relationships. And it ends up affecting all sorts of people. What did Luke learn by watching this? What did Timothy learn? You think of all the people that are affected when people reconcile. We had this family that was great friends with our family. I was so glad when they moved into our neighborhood. in the suburbs of Chicago because they had kids, our same kids' age, and we just got along, connected right away. They started coming to the church that I was pastoring, and so we would hang out a lot. We ended up being really close with them. We did vacations together, camping trips, a lot of holidays even together and stuff. And but the husband in that family, he was one of a bunch of siblings, had a lot of brothers and sisters. One of his brothers ended up just kind of making some choices with his lifestyle, and his parents got really frustrated, and they were fighting and having a lot of conflicts over all this. And his brother ended up moving out, and that happens a lot. But he moved out and actually totally disappeared. No one in the family knew where he was. No one heard from him. When we met my buddy, actually was like, yeah, honestly, no one in my family even knows if my brother is dead or alive. He said, my parents actually hired a private investigator for a while just to check. We just wanted to see, and couldn't find anything. And so they didn't even know. And then while we're a couple years into our friendship, my buddy got like an email, someone he didn't know, someone say, hey, I live out here, I live out in California, and my roommate's really struggling, kind of hitting rock bottom, and I think he might be related to you. So, is this the right guy? And if so, can you help? And I remember my wife and I watched their kids because my buddy and his wife jumped on a plane, instantly flew out here, found his brother and got him and brought him back. And his brother was living with them for a while, and we were always hanging out at their house. So, we'd be around and we saw his brother. And it wasn't easy. I mean, a lot of conflict, a lot of stuff, and they're just totally different personality types, and he'd been living a totally different life, and so we're just watching him try to navigate this. But this guy ended up, he actually joined started coming to our church a little bit, ended up joining our life group. That caused some conflicts in the group. Now you got brothers in there, and they're kind of disagreeing some, and he still needs to reconcile with parents and all this stuff. But we watched him kind of go through all of this, and he ended up reconciling with parents, with the other siblings. We actually got to baptize him at church. He actually, no joke, went on and went to seminary, and then ended up getting married. And at first, it's like, is all the family even going to go? I mean, that's how much conflict there was there. Do we even want to be there to support him? And they did. They all ended up going to the wedding. And, he doesn't live with them now. The family's all kind of spread out. But they're reconciled. And we just saw the picture, the power of what God can do. And so, I talk to lots of people that are in all sorts of conflicts. And I get it. I get how some of them just feel just outright impossible. Like, Carter, I just don't know how reconciling is ever going to happen. So I don't either. I'm just saying I've seen God do it. I've seen God do this powerful stuff when we make room for him to do that. So how do we really do that? How do we do that? Let's get really practical. It all begins with forgiveness. You know I was going to go there, but it's all got to begin with forgiveness. And Apostle Paul says in his letter to the Romans, remember, this is all stuff he learned while going through these conflicts in Acts, and so we get to read about the stuff he learned. And I love this verse. This should be a very freeing verse for you, relieve you of a lot of pressure that you're carrying, and also a very challenging verse. Because Paul says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Right? So the challenging part is, as far as it depends on you, have you done everything in your power to reconcile, to seek peace? And I need people asking me that, especially as conflict of order. Have you done everything in your power? No, I reached out once, but I didn't again. I didn't do that. Right? That's a great question. Have you done everything to help live at peace? That's a high bar. That's a high challenge for us. This is part of walking with Jesus. But the side of it that relieves you of pressure is what it says, as far as it depends on you. Because God's always about healthy boundaries. He knows there's nothing I can do to fix somebody else, to change somebody else. So if you say, honestly, I have, Carter, I've done everything I can. I've reached out, I've offered forgiveness, I've offered to get together, and they just refuse to, then I would say to you, okay, then you've done your part according to the word of God. Because as far as it depends on you, you live at peace. And some people just don't want to live at peace. And so for now, you're resolved of that, right? But have I done, as far as it depends on me? Now, if they come to me wanting to reconcile, ask forgiveness, and we'll talk about forgiveness in a minute and what that looks like, I mean, I'm called to respond, right? As far as it depends on me. So no, you don't have to fix anybody. You don't have to force reconciliation because you can't do that anyway. It takes two sides. But as far as it depends on us, live at peace. These echoing words of Jesus. Blessed are the peacemakers. Am I seeking peace, trying to make peace? So Paul wrote about seeking peace, about forgiveness, lots through his letters. But if I just had to pick one key passage about it, it's right here. His letter to the Colossians, all about forgiveness. These are such important words. In fact, they're so important, I'm going to have you read them out loud. That way you've spoken these words of God. Maybe they'll stick with you a little more. Maybe we can even speak them kind of into our own lives, into our own community. And so let's read this out loud together. Let God really speak to you. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you are called to peace, and be thankful. Man, those are good words right there. We got to get those in you. You got to, take a picture of that or write it down or make it your phone lock screen, tattoo it on yourself or something, right? But you just see how those words could really just change, our relationships and even our town and our church and our community, right? He says, well, it's a very OB verse, right? He says, hey, let peace rule. I love that, right? Let peace rule. Peace and love, man. That's what it's all about. But this is real peace and real love. And God says in the kingdom of God, peace rules and love rules, right? So he says, let him rule. Seek it. Forgive the way God forgave you. And it all comes to that. Forgive the way God forgave you. If you don't understand yet the depths of how God forgave you, that's okay. I believe you will find it harder to forgive others. I actually spoke on forgiveness once to this group in OB, and none of them were Christians, and I was like, That's a hard message to give because I don't know what to give to motivate people to forgive when I can't talk about that they've actually experienced forgiveness from God himself. And so found a few ways to work in some biblical truths. But listen, it flows out of understanding the depths of how God forgave you. That's why every week here, and we're not going to stop. We're going to keep doing worship songs that try to reconnect you to understanding the depths of God's amazing grace for you, the depths of his forgiveness for you. And that's why I just always want to talk about it and encourage each other with it, because the more I get the depths of his forgiveness for me, the more that flows out of me to forgive others. And so Paul says it all comes to pursuing forgiveness. That word forgive, by the way, in the Greek, it actually means to send away. Send away, and maybe you're like, that feels weird, like I send people away. It's the idea of releasing and sending away my bitterness, my resentment, my anger, my need for revenge, my unforgiveness. Can I send that away? Can I release that? And when I don't, I end up being the one who suffers. Maybe you've heard that saying, resentment or unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick, right? That whole thing. And that is what it is. It's really not punishing them. I'm punishing myself. And so God comes in and says, forgiveness is release that and send that away. I think about these words I learned growing up as a kid. Some of you maybe learned them if you're in certain churches, but they're words that Jesus records in the Gospels. But it's a prayer. It says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, or forgive us our debts, right, as we forgive our debtors. And I think, man, I've said those words hundreds, probably thousands of times in my life, but do I live them? To live that out? Forgive me while I'm busy forgiving others? Am I doing that side of it? But that's at the core of all this, is forgiveness. Again, it's at the core of marriage. When couples were surveyed that have been married for 50 years or longer, what was your secret? What's your key to make marriage last? And I would think their number one answer is communication, because everybody always says that's the number one skill, and it's important. Or that it would be, we kept the spark alive, and that's important. But their number one answer was, we got really good at forgiveness. And that's so not romantic. That just doesn't play well. I mean, it's not going to make some great, rom-coms and stuff about that. And I hope none of the guys got a Valentine's card if you're a girl that says, I just want to get really good at forgiving you. Because that just probably wouldn't go very well. It's just not a very romantic idea. But I'm telling you, it works, though. It's real life, right? Imagine just getting really good at forgiveness. Some of us say, man, I wish I could get good at that, right? But what if it's like a muscle and we can get good at that and exercise, getting good at forgiveness? Well, let's make sure we understand what forgiveness is, all right, before we're done. Let's get super, super, super clear on what forgiveness is. Offering forgiveness to somebody, here's what it's not, all right? And this is like the biggest misunderstanding and misconception about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not letting somebody off the hook. It's not saying what they did was okay. It's not even minimizing what they did. Well, I guess it wasn't that bad. I mean, you hurt me, but I guess I can get over it. No, it's not. And it's not admitting defeat. That's why some of us don't want to go first. Well, if I forgive them, they're going to think they won because I gave in. It's not admitting defeat. It's not minimizing or letting them off the hook. What forgiveness is, it seeks peace. It says, I'm going to finally release and set the prisoner free and realize the prisoner was me. And so forgiveness is saying, I'm choosing peace. I'm choosing reconciling. And I actually don't downplay. You know what? You did hurt me. And actually, it's going to keep hurting for a while. And I choose to forgive you anyway. All right? Forgiveness, by the way, doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt anymore. Doesn't mean that, and it doesn't mean that the relationship is 100% back to where it was. All right? So you can, I just want to be super clear, you can forgive someone and still be hurt. You can forgive and still grieve that the relationship will never be the same. Sometimes it just won't. Right? I mean, in the cases of things like abuse, different stuff, sometimes in divorces, sometimes in different things where it's like, the relationship's just never going to be restored to be what it was. But I can still forgive. You can also forgive, by the way, and still have really healthy boundaries. I forgive you. I'm not letting you back into my life right now, because that isn't healthy, but I still choose to forgive you. Right? So just don't confuse those things. Our culture is confused a lot of that. So you can choose forgiveness, and it can still hurt, and you still have healthy boundaries, but you're no longer the slave to resentment and revenge and anger, and you're now living out the grace of God. You're letting peace rule in your life. You're letting love rule at the end of the day, and you still have really healthy boundaries. But it's about, will we choose forgiveness, forgive as Lord forgave you. By the way, when we're asking for forgiveness, all right, when we're the ones apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, we got to make sure we get this right, because you always get this wrong too. How to not say you're sorry. You can't do the, I'm sorry, but. I'm sure that's been done to you, and maybe you've done it before. Well, I'm sorry, but you don't know what you did to me, right? Or I'm sorry, but that's not normally who I am. I've just been really stressed lately. And no, it's not I'm sorry, but. Right? I might have all excuses in the world. That doesn't count. And, I'm sorry if you were hurt by what I did. I'm really sorry that upset you. I'm sure you've heard that before. That's like the fake apology, right? It's like, wait, I don't think aren't you still blaming me? You're not actually apologizing for anything, right? So that doesn't count. By the way, I have done these, and so I hope I'm not the only one in here. But, and just being like, well, I already said I was sorry. All right, that's not. Here's how you do it. It's actually really simple. Ready? I'm going to teach you today. It's really simple. The 3 easy steps. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? That's it. I'm sorry I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Ready? Try it. I'm sorry I was wrong. Will you forgive me? See, that wasn't that hard, right? Now you got to try it in front of an actual person. But, that's it right there. Now I'm sorry, bud, and you this and that. You know what? Just listen. I'm sorry I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Right? I've had to say those words many times. Said them to employees I have, people that work for me, said it to bosses I have, had to say it to my own kids, but I'm glad because that's powerful, because I hope they're catching it, that I can teach it to them. I luckily have made it 23 years of marriage and have never had to say it to my wife, so I'm pretty lucky in that, so that's good. Of course, she's not in this service, so I may change my story at our 5 p.m., but you can ask her and see if that's true. I've had to say it many times, right? No, but just think about just the simplicity of that. Someone actually had to say that to me this week, and it was great, and I forgave him. Well, they're like, I'm sorry, man, I blew it, man, I was wrong. And will you forgive me? Yeah, I will. Right? By the way, those are the words you can say to God as well, right? I'm sorry, but God, but you don't know how hard life has been, right? So, you know what, God, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was wrong. That's admitting what we call sin, right? Will you forgive me? Great news with him. Answer is always yes. Just a little sneak peek, all right? With the people in your life, remember, some may say, no, I don't forgive you. And you say, well, as far as it depends on me, and live at peace. And I tried, and for now, they don't want to live at peace. But you did your part, all right? But with God, he will always say, if you're genuine about, I'm sorry I was wrong, he'll always say, yeah, I will. That's grace. One last thing on it. I've just kind of put this here this week as we're talking about peace. Just a quick little acronym about this idea. Always seeking peace. That begins praying for them. Again, not praying that God would rain down fire and brimstone on them, but praying that God would actually work in their hearts. Matthew 5 is Jesus saying, pray for your enemies. And I know we don't use that word that often, but if we're really honest, if we're brutally honest, that is what we make people a little bit in our minds. People kind of become, when they've heard us and we've gone long enough, we think of them as enemies. And we even kind of dehumanize them. And we can even demonize them a little bit. And it's about just praying, God, you know what, soften their heart. That's what I pray. God, work in their heart. Like, do the heart work that I can't do. Soften their heart, change their perspective, because I can't do that. But soften my heart. So praying for enemies, empathize, as we talked about, seeing from their perspective. James, who I mentioned earlier, that's Jesus' brother, he writes in James 1, he says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. And that's a great practice for fighting and conflicts. Imagine if both sides were really quick to listen and really slow to speak. Then it's about going first. Remember, going first is not admitting defeat. It's not excusing anybody. It's just saying, you know what, I'm sick of this cycle continuing, so I'm going to go first and choose forgiveness or asking forgiveness anyway. And that's what Jesus did. Blessed are the peacemakers. Matthew 18, we did not have time to go into that. More great teaching about how to reconcile with people straight from Jesus. So you can read that as well. Matthew 18, choose a forgiveness. We already read that one. Colossians 3, and then encouragement. That's what Barnabas was. So I think Paul, kind of cool that Paul learned that from Barnabas. They didn't always see eye to eye. But Paul learned it from him, and then he wrote in one of his letters, hey, encourage each other whenever you get the chance. Always seek encouragement, right? Because there's so much power in forgiveness. We make room for God to do something powerful in both of us and in other people's lives. I'll close with this story. It was all the way back in 1960, this 6-year-old girl, her name was Ruby Bridges, and she walked into this elementary school in New Orleans when it was the very first day after a judge desegregated the school. And so she's a little African-American girl, and she walked in, and there's actually still an angry mob of white people, adults and stuff, kind of yelling at her and kind of causing all this commotion. And she was this brave little 6-year-old girl just walking right through. And, and she made it in and made it in her school day, became kind of famous. But years later, this Harvard psychiatrist, Robert Coles, he interviewed Ruby Bridges growing up, and he said, so Ruby, when you see old photos and even old kind of video of that day, it looked like your lips were moving while you were walking in. Like, were you mumbling under your breath about the people or trying to say something to them, or what was that? And she said, well, actually, I was praying. And he said, well, what were you praying about? And she said, actually, I was praying that God would forgive them, because that's what Jesus prayed while he was on the cross. Yeah, that's the power of forgiveness, right? And then what's really cool is a few months later, Robert Coles, the Harvard psychiatrist, he gave his life to Jesus because he saw the power of forgiveness from this girl. When we make room for forgiveness to rule and peace to rule and for God to work, he can do powerful things in us and them and even in other people around us that are watching. So I got to ask you as we close, who is it? Who is it for you? If any names came to your mind while we talked today, then I'm going to venture to say that might be the Holy Spirit bringing that name to your mind. And so what is a step you need to take? Maybe you've already taken all the steps and now you're just in the mode of, I just got to pray for God to work on them. That's good too. But as far as it depends on you, right? So what's that next step? Somebody has to go first. Will it be you? Because God went first with us. And lastly, maybe the person you need to reconcile with is God. Because we can also harbor a lot of bitterness at God. And we're mad at him. He took something from me. Why could he let this happen? Why doesn't he answer my prayer? Did he abandon me? Right? And all these kind of reasons we can have bitterness at God. Will you come to him? Talk about it. Be honest. Say, I'm sorry I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Help me see your perspective, God. Will you reconcile with him? He always is waiting to reconcile. He already went first with Jesus. So he's always waiting for you to come back. All right. In fact, let's pray about that right now. We can actually try that with God. God, we just come to you and thank you. Thank you. You modeled this. This is so hard, God. It's so hard. But thank you that you went first with us. You sent Jesus first before we ever came back to you. And so I pray you'd give us the power and the courage to do that. Help any of us who needs to reconcile with you. And of course, reconciling means being honest. Being humble, so if we need to just come to you and say, yeah, God, I'm mad at you. I'm ticked off at you. I'm disappointed in you. And we just say it. Say, I feel hurt. Then we humble ourselves, God. We say, give us your perspective. Help us trust you as our loving Father who only always acts out of love, out of peace, out of reconciling. And if we're ready, we come to you in our heart, maybe for the first time ever. Our first time in a long time, and we just say, I'm sorry. God, I have been wrong, and will you forgive me? And I pray that we leave this place knowing that your answer is always yes. My amazing grace says yes. I'll always forgive you. And God, I pray you give each of us the courage to have any conversations with people that we need to have in our own life. Give us the words to say, courage to do it. I pray no matter how hard it is, we get past all the kind of the ego and the I don't want to go first and all that and just do it and get to the other side and say, now your peace can rule in my heart. And now I've released this and sent it away. And so we just pray. We pray you'd work in the other people's heart, do the work we can't do. Soften their heart, change their perspective. Some of us have waited for years for a change of heart. You can still do it. So show up, work in them. And work in us, work in our heart. We come to you. We just want to learn to forgive the way you forgave us. So it's in your name we ask for the power to do that. Amen.